So I'm really excited about our next panel. And this is the final panel of the day before our final discussion. So this is really an important one. It's about what's happening with food loss and food waste globally. I'm really pleased to welcome Devon Klatell, an associate director at the Rockefeller Foundation. She, as I mentioned before, along with Monica Munn, have been incredible supporters of Food Tank's work. Like many of you in this room, the Rockefeller Foundation is also supporting so many of your amazing initiatives. And I want to thank them again for their leadership and their willingness to be open to collaboration. Let's give them a round of applause, please. Devon is going to give a brief introduction before the panel and talk a little bit more about the work of Rockefeller on global food loss prevention. But before she comes up to the stage, I'm just going to introduce each of our panelists as well as our moderator. We have Kim Severson from the New York Times, and she will be joined by panelists Prasanta Kalita, Dean for Academic Programs, the College of Agricultural and Environmental Sciences, University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. Bonnie McClafferty, the Director for Agriculture for Nutrition Global Program at the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition. Carina Millstone, the Executive Director at Feedback. Loren, Cardeli, the Co-Founder and President of Growing Culture. And Kavita, Shukla, the founder and CEO of Fenugreek. So please join me in welcoming them all to the stage.
I want to just start by really returning the thanks to Danielle and Vanessa and the whole Food Tank team for putting on what I think has been a really energizing and invigorating day today. All of us at the Rockefeller Foundation are really privileged to partner with Food Tank, with the Fink Family Foundation, and with ReFed on today's summit. It's been about 5 years since the Rockefeller Foundation started to explore this space, and I can say honestly that when we started to think about food loss and waste about 5 years ago, we weren't entirely sure that there would be a community out in the world that would share our passion for this particular issue. And I think just the folks in this room, the really amazingly, apparently long waiting list to get into this event, are a real testament to the progress that we've all made together and to the sort of diversity and array of change makers that we're lucky to have in this space. Having said all that, we have a tough task in front of us. And I think we've heard a lot today about the environmental and economic costs associated with food loss and waste. And I won't repeat them all here, but I will just say that I think the most shocking injustice is that despite living in a world where nearly 2 billion people suffer from some form of malnutrition, there's still a huge proportion of our food that goes uneaten. And global food security has long been at the core of Rockefeller's work. One of our hallmark programs in the 20th century was the Green Revolution, which used science and technology to increase global agricultural production and prevented starvation for 1 billion people. But I want to be really clear about one point, particularly as we go into this final panel of the day, and that is that I don't believe that we can sustain a nourishing global food system if we don't start eating more of what we grow. And ensuring food is used to feed people is the core of what we think of as a greener revolution. And that's an effort that we're committed to and that we committed to when we launched our YieldWise initiative about 2 years ago and committed $130 million to the global fight against food loss and waste. In sub-Saharan Africa, we're working to reduce the massive amount of food that's lost on the farm and just after harvest. And this work includes helping smallholder farmers in Kenya, Nigeria, and Tanzania to increase their selling power by using really fairly simple technologies to safely harvest and store more of their crops. Of course, access to markets and a diversity of buyers is also key, and so we're facilitating that too. Together with our partners, some of whom you'll hear from shortly, we've enabled more than 100,000 mango, maize, and tomato farmers to better access markets. Through those markets, these farmers have sold more than 90,000 metric tons of food that could otherwise have been lost. And we think that's pretty good progress for our first 18 months. We're really eager to see the results that will come from the next crop harvest and the one after that. Today, I think we've spent a lot of time as a group focused on the food waste issue here in the United States. And I think we've heard over and over again that here, advancing the greener revolution requires examining cultural values around convenience and abundance and aesthetics, and understanding how those are drivers of copious amounts of waste at the business level and the consumer level. We've been working with a range of partners, many of whom are here in the room. In the last panel, we heard a little bit about some of our work in cities, where NRDC is working hard to understand the sort of how, what, and why of food waste from urban households and businesses. We heard this morning that our partners, including Pete Pearson from the World Wildlife Fund, are tackling hotspots in the industry sector, particularly in hospitality. And I think we heard from Chef Tom Kalita and others why that is so important from a business perspective and in terms of engaging the consumer and the guest. And then lastly, we're partnering with the food recovery community to make sure that we are using as much of the food as we can to feed people, and working with organizations like City Harvest and Feeding America. But before we go into this last panel, which is really focused on the global issue, I want to make the point that the challenges of post-harvest loss and so-called consumer waste are not fully distinct problems. As our food system continues to globalize, these problems are becoming more and more linked. And as you'll likely hear shortly from Carina, who's one of our panelists, cosmetic specifications and unfair trading practices originating in one market, including here in the US, can often cause significant loss in other markets, particularly exporting countries in the developing world. In Senegal, 65% of mangoes are wasted every year, in part for these reasons. So we must also do more to ensure that wasteful practices from the United States and other developed markets are not exported elsewhere through our global system. Having said all that, I think over the last 2 years, and certainly here today, we've seen really good reasons for optimism. Secretary Vilsack said this morning that realizing our shared goal depends on all of us changing our behavior, and I think these behaviors don't have to be big and complicated. They can be simple and straightforward to be effective. But it's going to require change from all of us, and that includes the folks in the media that can help us spread the message about why this cause is so important to those outside of this room. So in this next panel, you'll hear from leaders from a variety of backgrounds and sectors that are all held together by a common thread, a dedication to creating a waste and loss-free world. And once again, I just want to thank everyone for being here today and for joining us in this movement against food loss and waste.
Hello. Hi. We're your final panel of the day, and the best panel, if anybody asks. Okay. So we're the best panel. My name's Kim Severson, and I write for the New York Times. And we have quite a powerhouse group up here. And I think the point of this panel was to take some of the projects that are happening around the globe and sort of showing how all these little pieces of the mosaic make a bigger picture about where we stand with food waste. And some of them are very small, simple little things. Some are much more complex ideas. And everyone here represents a very interesting part of the food waste and nutrition world around the globe. So we have a fairly short amount of time and a lot of people. So we're just going to let folks talk a little bit about what they do, and then hopefully leave a lot of time for questions and interaction. They cut out our costume changes, so we're a little worried about that. But anyway, sorry, it's a long day, right? So we're going to start at the end with Kavita. This is her product, and it smells like fenugreek. It's great. In fact, Josh, I should pass this around so you guys can smell it. It's a very simple thing that started when she was 12 years old, and had a grandmother who used some, it was an Ayurvedic sort of approach, some spices to heal her, and she thought these spices that are being used in the kitchen can make me feel better, and maybe they can have a greater effect. And now she has a terrific story. So you started out as a 12-year-old wanting to build these papers. Tell us just a little bit about your story.
Yeah, so FreshPaper is a really simple concept. It's a little sheet of paper that's actually infused with edible spices. and it can keep food fresh for longer. But as Kim was saying, I actually never imagined that this is how my life would turn out. And I was 12 years old. I was visiting my grandmother in India, and I drank some dirty tap water, and I was really scared I was going to get sick. And she gave me this homemade mixture from her kitchen. And my grandmother didn't have a lot of resources, so it was literally this like brown mixture she made with various ingredients from her kitchen. And I still remember, for me, that was such an incredible moment because I didn't get sick, and I remember just thinking it was almost magical. So that was kind of how my obsession began, with these spices that my grandmother taught me about. But then as I started to experiment, I actually came home and I started adding them to jars of dirty pond water because I was like a middle schooler, so that was the logic. And then to make a long story short, I started to have this idea that maybe I could use what I thought was going on to keep food fresh. And so I spent most of my high school years as this weird kid rotting fruits and vegetables in my garage. But eventually that led me to create a way to infuse some of those spices into FreshPaper and create a really simple technology that could keep food fresh for longer. And the entire time I was thinking about people like my grandmother. Over 1 billion people live without access to refrigeration. And I didn't even realize that in the United States or in the developed world, food waste was an issue. I literally thought that this was a technology for somebody like my grandmother who didn't have a fridge growing up. And so I tried when I got to college. I found out I was going to get a patent for FreshPaper, and it was so far beyond anything I could have imagined.
You just get a patent.
But I'm a first-generation immigrant. It was really clear to me that even my grandmother, with all of her brilliance, she had so few opportunities. And there I was. I had a patent. I was on my way to Harvard, and I was sure that I was going to be able to do something with this idea. I was going to be able to get it to people like my grandma. And what happened next is I ended up learning how hard it can be to give something away for free. What I kept hearing was that I would need to raise a lot of money. I would need a lot more experience. And like many young women, I actually stopped believing that I would ever be enough to do anything with FreshPaper. So what most people don't know is that it actually took me 10 years to find the courage to take the next step with my idea. But what I did about 5 years ago is I took handmade sheets of FreshPaper to my local farmer's market. I started with about $300 in paper making supplies, and I was trying to get it to the local farmers because I realized that even in the Boston summers, perhaps there was a need to extend the life of the produce, and perhaps they could give their produce to local food banks. So that was kind of the idea. What I never expected was that there was tremendous consumer demand for a really simple solution for keeping food fresh for longer.
How long can this extend the life of something?
Yeah, it's about 2 to 4 times. So it's
Okay.
a pretty significant extension, and it works by inhibiting bacterial and fungal growth.
Okay.
So you get a pretty significant extension, and I think that's kind of why it started to take off in this
So all the
fast
farmers
way.
markets customers were like, awesome, I'll pay $5 for that.
Exactly.
And then you were like off to the races, right?
Yeah, so we got into one local retailer, and I was like, wow, this is amazing. And I started to think maybe we could actually fund being able to give it to food banks, to get it to the developing world through this idea of a social enterprise. And then what happened next was we heard from Whole Foods, which was our first major retailer. And at the time, it was just me and my co-founder, and we had an intern, and we were making it in our kitchen. So I didn't even know how to work with Whole Foods, and I was hoping they would let us start in like one local store. But they told us they wanted to launch in the entire region. And so that was kind of the first step. I'll never forget, we took like this borrowed Toyota Corolla and we rolled up into a sea of 18-wheelers, and like that was our distribution vehicle. And we opened the dock and we unloaded it all by hand, but that was how it began. I think that's what most people don't realize, is that was how the distribution began. And today we're in Walmart, we're in most of the major grocers and retailers, and we work with farmers and families in about 35 countries, but it really was a very small, simple idea that started in my grandmother's kitchen.
So, and it's an amazing story. Like, thanks, let's give it up for that. All right. And I feel like Oprah up here, but so nobody's getting a car, but but now how does this work with farmers? So let's go beyond the like wealthy farmers market, Whole Food shoppers. Yeah. So what are you doing actually out in developing nations with this?
Yeah, so FreshPaper, what's remarkable about it is it can be used really in any environment by anyone, any part of the world. And I think that's what I realized when I started to get exposed to this world of food waste and food sustainability, is that a lot of the solutions aren't really useful or applicable for some of the world's poorest folks, which are really the people that need to benefit from this. Of course, I was shocked that there was a tremendous market for it in the US and then in Europe, and I realized that's because actually everybody's looking for organic, sustainable solutions to keep their food fresh. Mm-hmm. But if you're a fruit seller or a fruit seller in the developing world, you literally just place the sheet underneath a stack of produce. It's really that simple, and you can leave it there for a month. So each sheet lasts for a month, and then it's compostable. So it's not adding extra plastics. There's no wax. You're not vacuum sealing. It's not a technology that they can't understand. It's also not a technology that they can't.
How do you get it
afford.
distributed to, you know, someone in, I don't know, in India or India? I'm like, do you just have big shipments that go out and you sell it, or do you supplement it with funding from other sources to distribute it for free?
So that was one of my first challenges, was like when I first had the dream, I thought, okay, I'm going to make a ton and then I'm going to ship it to India and Africa, and then I realized that there's a lot more involved. So that was my 15-year-old vision. Today what we do is we partner with nonprofits that are already working with smallholder farmers in the developing world, as well as with large-scale food banks in the US, and then they do the education. They help us get it to those that can benefit from it most, but we provide the technology, and then our goal now is to make it as affordable as possible and as accessible at every step.
Great, thank you very much. And another thing that was so interesting are these like small little solutions that make a big difference. So let's go to Prasanta now. You were talking about you do research on ways that small changes in harvest times or simple solutions to drying can make huge difference in the yield that farmers have and also in their own health. So you're a researcher, right?
Yep.
And one thing we were talking about was, and you work with farms in India, Ethiopia, Bangladesh, China,
Brazil.
Talk about the wheat farmers in China and just a little bit about the program or the idea you came up for them.
Sure. Well, thank you. At the beginning when we started looking at what are some of those small changes can make huge impact, we went around and did some strategy formulation meetings with farmers, the in-country, the administrators, the researchers, and the few things that can significantly make a dent into that is, number one is awareness. People just don't know that they lose 30% of their crops. And then the number two would be something like the moisture, the information about the moisture content when the crops need to be harvested. Number three would be, both the drying and storage. How do they dry that? To what moisture content the crops need to be dried? So this information that, when we brought it to the Chinese farmers, about 900 wheat farmers, and we told them that, you need to harvest the crop at this particular moisture content and use your machineries. We have a data to show that by doing that, harvesting the crops at the, about 18% moisture content for the wheat, they can significantly reduce the crop loss at a harvesting time from 6.5% to about 1%. So that's about 5 and 5.5% reduction from several billion tons of wheat. So that's a huge information.
Did they buy it when you first came up and said, hey, farmers who've been doing this the same way for a lot of years, I have a new idea? Would they just go, great? I mean, how did that work?
They would not do that. You had to convince.
Thank you. Yeah.
The farmers have been doing this for thousands of years.
Right.
And we tell them something is, first of all, you look like an Indian anyway. Yeah. So why are they going to listen to you? So, we have to have the demonstration plots. Show them the farmers. Several years, several seasons we need to show them. We did that with wheat, we did that with rice, we did that with corn. And in India, we are doing the same experiments, showing them in all the pulses, the lentils and everything else out there. So it needs to get into their culture. They need to see that by doing that, adopting this simple technology that, sensing the moisture contents and changing your harvesting time, you can reduce that. And then they believe
How
it.
do they sense the moisture? Like, so they're out in the field, what do they?
There are moisture meters that they can do that. There are many other ways. These days, farmers in developing countries now, they have at least 2 cell phones. So they have the information. That technology, taking the picture and sensing and connecting the sensor with their cell phones, those are becoming very usual practices for them. So we have very low-cost moisture sensors. And you can also do with the remote sensing, many of that thing. If you know the weather patterns, if you know that, when there will be rain and humidity and all those kind of thing, and the maturity date of the crops, the farmers are able to adopt those very simple low-cost technologies to reduce the losses.
And you also were looking at coal. They have to dry grain, right?
Absolutely.
And so they were using coal dryers. Is that right?
They're-
Tell us
they're-
about that project. That was in India.
That's in India and in Bangladesh, through working the USAID project, then the ADM Institute for Post-Harvest Loss Prevention, and the University of Illinois. We also wanted to, for those developing countries, we mostly work with several thousand farmers. These are small scale, smallholders. They don't have more than 1 hectare of land. So if we tell them, you use this Hohenheim University built many $1,000 dryer, they're not going to use it. So we found this simple dryer that was invented in some unknown farmers in Vietnam many years ago. So we brought that to Bangladesh, let people modify that, and it only cost about $500. So
Is it coal or solar?
the coal.
The coal
one.
yeah.
The solar one would be in long term should reduce the prices
I see.
and also become very environmental friendly. We are right now experimenting with having two facets of the drying, either using the conventional fuel or also changing it to a solar dryer
Right.
system out there. So what it is doing, it's very cost effective. They can reduce the moisture content from, let's say, about 20% to 12%. And it's recommended that you store your crops at 12 to 13% moisture content. You can store it for many months out there. So farmers are seeing a benefit of that. They don't have to sell their products right at harvest at high moisture contents. The middlemen get the benefit. Farmers don't have any storage facilities, so they sell it. And even though the farmers couldn't sell it before, the crops get this aflatoxin, which is a toxin. The people eat that. Poor farmers, they consume that product for themselves. They sell the better products for better price. So it causes all kinds of health issues.
Yeah.
So what we are seeing now, the farmers are very happy. They can reduce the moisture content. They store it in those airtight bags, and they watch the market. We give them the market information, and not only within their community, but farmers now are having the market information of their crop within about 7 to 10 miles.
Wow.
So they can wait and sell their products at the right price. Plus, the thing crops that they store it for the home consumption, they don't get sick or anything.
Right.
The other benefit that the farmers are seeing that if they dry it and store it in those bags, and most developing countries, smallholder farmers, they use those crops for the next year's seeds and out there because seed is very expensive. So what our experiments show that by conventional storage of the very high moisture content, they only see about 30% germination rate. Mm-hmm. But by storing it and saving those crops at those airtight bags, their germination rate is more than 98%.
Wow.
That's a significant gain for the farmers out there. So we have established some villages, through the ADM Institute, ADM village in Bihar, which is one of the most underprivileged community in the states in India. So farmers are really looking at the benefits.
Right. And word travels fast among farmer communities,
right? Oh my
right?
goodness, absolutely.
If one person goes, look, I'm growing 98% of the seed, then everybody wants to do it, right?
Right. Most post-harvest operations are conducted by women.
Right.
So now, they see some fun future for them. Mm-hmm. And, so we are teaching the farmers. We have developed a course, Coursera course, free course, about just to raise the awareness. The post-harvest loss happens and is preventable. Some very low-cost technology and understanding some best practices.
Great. Thank you.
Absolutely.
And Loren, this sort of segues nicely into your work as a president and co-founder of a growing culture. So you really work on empowering farmers, right? And approaches from a social justice aspect. And sort of as a byproduct, you're reducing food waste and improving harvest for farmers. And you also had some interesting way, we were talking about black soldier flies, for example, and your ability to get farmers to share the information they know about certain technologies. But talk a little bit about the approach you take to working with farmers in developing nations and how then it translates into food waste.
Absolutely. So for me, the two big words are innovation and innovations. We're talking about innovations, right? Your grandmother's innovation, the Vietnamese farmer's innovations, right? But that is the byproduct, that's the finish. But what's more important than the innovations is the innovation. That's the act of innovating. That's the act of believing in yourself and your capacity to transform the world around you. That innovation potential of the 2.5 billion people that exist within our peasant food system is incredible. And these are where the solutions are coming to address some of the biggest issues of our time, whether it's gender inequalities, whether it's mitigating climate change, or whether it's combating food waste, right? They're not coming just from Palo Alto. They're not coming just from Wall Street. So let's look to the communities at the grassroots with a capital G. And that's the work that we do, is supporting the, like, I hate the word empowering, but it's like, how do you not say it? How do you get around it, right? But it's really about building agency, right, and capacity, and humanization of the ones who grow our food. So the solutions are everywhere. And as you said, word from farmer to farmer travels, right? They're not going to believe a Puerto Rican Jew from New York City going to the Rift Valley in Africa saying, this is a solution. You know, that just doesn't work. But farmers have those solutions. So how do we support them to create these techniques, these models for change, and then scale it out so farmers can collectivize innovation while democratizing the information, right? Because the revolution may not be televised, but it will be open source.
Give us a couple examples of projects that you've seen work in that way, farmer to farmer, sharing that.
Absolutely,
you know.
yeah. Where to begin? It's everywhere. Let's see. Vietnam, right? Let's talk about, we worked with a lot of farmers for, farmers were designing models for lactic fermentation of market waste, right?
Say that again.
Lactic acid fermentation.
You said that like we all know. It's like,
Yeah, sorry.
lactic ferment, So explain that.
It's pretty simple. So you take a culture from milk and you ferment cabbage and the byproducts, the things you can't sell from the food market, and you create high nutrient, easily digestible feed for your livestock, right? So as we take our supply chain and it becomes larger and bigger, farmers lose their ability to control the food waste and to have access to their own food waste, which then increases their need for foreign inputs, right? Which then diminishes their autonomy over their production model, and which is the reason why we have to have gatherings like this talking about how to fix the food system, right? So how do we do that? And these techniques where farmers can actually create smaller supply chains, connect to their food waste, and revolutionize how that's used. It's used as animal feeds like that, you know? Another model was, there's a privy fly we call here. It's called the black soldier fly, right? This fly is incredible. I mean, you wouldn't even believe it. It doesn't bother humans because it has no mouth. So if it has no mouth, right? Think about, how does it survive? It survives because in the larvae stage, it just eats, right? And it eats anything. You can put this larvae in rubbing alcohol and it'll survive for 2 hours. It eats acidic, it eats salt, it eats human waste, animal waste, right? And it converts it into this beautiful, high protein, high lipid meal, the highest found in nature, right? If you can interrupt, I know it's kind of sad, but interrupt the stage to maturity, to the development, and gather them at the end of their larvae stage, there's something like 44% protein, 34% lipid, right? That's incredible livestock feed.
And
right?
so they can eat, carcasses, and it's essentially like a little composting system, right? So if you've got animals who maybe you die and you harvest the meat, you need to deal with the bone somehow, or they can eat that and then turn it into feed to feed.
Absolutely. I mean, there's model. I mean, so some stories about this. Like, we were working with different communities, bringing farmers that were leading the innovation and helping them facilitate to new areas to scale out the farmer-to-farmer training, right? So we brought into this one community in northern Vietnam, and we were setting it up, and we were baiting the black soldier fly, and it was this pumping production. And every morning, you'd come and you'd get like a 5-gallon bucket of this larvae, right? And so I'm looking at the amount that we're harvesting every morning, and I'm getting excited. You wake up, that's the first thing you check, and then you go brush your teeth and get ready, But then
you want to party with this guy, because that is fun. Nothing like a bucket of larvae in the morning.
Yeah,
But anyway, go ahead, I'm sorry.
That's what surprised me, is because all of a sudden the amount that I was coming and seeing that before the farmers harvested it was decreasing. I was saying, what's going on? And I went to the kitchen to find out, and they were frying them up, eating them for breakfast before I woke up.
Interesting.
And other farmers were putting these the method for raising black soldier fly in the chicken pen, and they were dumping all the waste, and as the larvae climb out, the chickens are just waiting, and it's just like an instant, like automatic feeder.
That's great.
And
do you contain the flies in like a big, plastic container or something?
You can design your own container. The flies, you create the food waste, right? So it's like a large compost bin.
I'm just moderately
right?
fascinated by this. So
think about this. Like you have this bin with all this, waste, right? They're in it. They're just devouring it. It's like those videos you see of the larvae like going down the fish, right? So then if you have a ramp that's like less than 30 degrees angle, once they've got enough nutrient to like transform, they climb out, right? If you leave that lamp to a hole that falls into a bucket, they don't go anywhere else but the bucket. You know what I mean? And they auto-collect themselves, right? But this is the innovation this is the wealth of knowledge that exists in these communities. I mean, you want to transform the world. You want to talk about climate change or food waste. Why don't you look at these communities with unbelievable adversity, economic oppression, changing climate? Look at them, because they turn that adversity into unbridled ingenuity.
Interesting. It's the connections. Well, we're going to go from the farm into the grocery store a little bit with Carina, who's the executive director of Feedback. And you all may have, Tristram Stewart kind of revolutionized or made food waste a thing, and made it a thing, I guess, with a book in 2009 and a TED Talk on the global food waste scandal. And then also from that came your organization, Feedback, right? And you are kind of pushing people at the supply chain and the supermarket level, right? So it's the corporate folks as well as the consumers. And talk a little bit about what you're seeing in your world, and particularly around in the UK.
Yeah, sure. So here I am on the global panel.
It's hard to beat the black soldier fly, but I know you can do it.
But us Brits have a long, illustrious history of going all over the world and screwing things up. And
it's one of your superpowers.
That's right.
Very
and
good
what
at
we
it.
found is that it's no exception with food waste. So the work we've been doing, it's really been looking at how the trading behavior, the business decisions taken by global North supermarkets, in particular British ones, but also European and American, generate huge amounts of food waste in global South exporting countries. So here I'm not talking about waste that occurs maybe as a result of technological failure, so maybe post-harvest losses, as you were discussing, but really waste that occurs because of power imbalances in the global supply chains. So what do I mean? Effectively, when there are many, thousands of producers, and when you have a very concentrated supermarket and import market, these importers and these retailers are really in a position to dictate the terms of their business with the producers. And what they do, they set incredibly rigid cosmetic specifications. So by this, the idea that an onion needs to be between 6 and 6.2 inches, for example, or beans need to be cut on either side, or really things that really only affect the aesthetics of the produce, not the taste in any way. So in order to be able to meet these specifications, what we've seen is producers really being in a state of what I would describe as normalized overproduction, having to produce loads, great volumes to make sure they can deliver on their orders. So that's one way in which these specifications do actually result in a lot of waste in places. So we've seen this happen in Kenya, we've seen this with green beans, in Peru with onions, in Senegal with mangoes. And really it's a massive problem. I would say probably between 2 and 50% of these crops grown for export are lost for that very reason. So cosmetic specifications can be kind of resolved a bit. I mean, you guys all know about all the wonky veg piece and the imperfect produce, and I think Feedback's been really instrumental in getting that agenda pushed up, the kind of consumer awareness. I'd also say we've uncovered evidence of more sinister things going on, what I would actually just call unfair trading practices. So really it's We've got evidence of cosmetic specifications being used as a front to cancel orders. Saying one day, oh, we need to harvest X tons of green beans. Next day, the producer gets a phone call, oh, sorry, we've changed our minds. That the farmer has already harvested his crop. There isn't necessarily a ready secondary market. Obviously, it's a product with a very short shelf life. And here we are having huge amounts of waste generated.
This is from another grower who's trying to get in on that, or like who's the nefarious party here?
The importers and the retailers.
Oh, because they're trying to get a different product at a different price.
Or they've changed their mind, or they're in a position to essentially push all the risk down their supply chains. Well, the question to us, to these producers, is why on earth are you...
deep veg mafia. It's just somebody trying to lower the price.
Pretty much. Okay. The buyers. Yeah.
I was just trying to understand.
No.
Okay.
So we've been asking, why do you do business with these people? And the answer is, bad business is better than no business. So effectively, a lot of producers are beholden to, export producers have to export their products. And it's really a buyer's market in terms of setting the conditions. So we have done, I think, a good job at really getting this on the agenda. I think no other organization was investigating this issue.
Have you seen some results?
Absolutely. We always have our big success story that I always talk about are these Kenyan green beans, where we managed to make a direct link with this food waste generated in Kenya with Tesco's, which is our biggest UK supermarket. Avoid like the plague if you're ever in the UK.
You never shop there.
Our great partners, Tesco's, are doing great work on food waste.
Sponsored by Tesco.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, Tesco's have really are often recognised as kind of having taken the lead on food waste, and essentially a lot of this is because of feedback work. Having produced a report saying you realise that your practices are leading to massive impoverishment of producers in Kenya. The answer is no, that hadn't crossed our mind. And now we have this really embarrassing report and a really irritating NGO on our case. We better do something about it. And one of the and a very quick win. These beans used to be cut on both sides, double trimmed, and now only single trimmed. And incredibly, this has reduced food waste by a third. So there are some simple solutions.
And people will buy the beans.
Sure. Sure. And I think. The reality is, supermarkets often say, consumers expect certain cosmetic specifications. Actually, we know that cosmetic specifications vary a lot depending on is it a glut year or is it not a glut year, and so essentially, consumers are willing to adjust. So I think we've been really instrumental at really getting supermarkets to think very carefully how these specifications, how their trading practices does generate waste overseas.
And do you feel like the kind of ugly fruit campaign, has that been effective in a partnership with that, or is that just sort of window dressing, like everybody like, oh yeah, I think, bruised fruit, sure I'll buy these, but theoretically they're always picking the best looking tomato, or is it actually working?
Interestingly, I think it's been a great first start. It's an ugly produce bag. So, a great first step. Moving from the idea that all apples are the same, a great first step for consumers.
So it's a culture, we have to have this cultural mindset shift among shoppers.
I'll say that for us now, we're moving towards what I would call, wonky veg 2.0. And since
wonky. We don't say that word a lot here in the
United
States.
Wonky veg.
We'll work on it. Wonky veg.
It's a word I try and use at least twice a week. So
Thank you.
Try and integrate it into your vocabulary. Yeah. I was going to say, so we know that these cosmetic specifications cause huge amounts of waste. So very simply, we're calling on supermarkets to publish them. And we hope that if we can get supermarkets to publish their cosmetic specifications, it'll become apparent, it'll become completely apparent that it is ridiculous mandating that beans should be a certain size, corn should be a certain size, and so forth.
It was institutional overproduction. There was a
normalized overproduction.
Normalized overproduction, which is, when you think about it, that is, of course, how much of you're forcing farmers. It's like the baby carrot thing in reverse, sort of, right? You're forcing farmers to grow so much extra
That's
just
right.
to get that one.
That's absolutely right. Yeah.
I feel sort of terrible about
And,
that.
and in fact, when I think of food waste now, I've started to think of it more as we are in a context of normalized overproduction rather than we're in a system where food waste occurs.
Great.
Yeah.
All right, Bonnie, you're going to give us the big picture. You're Director of Agriculture for Nutrition, a global program for the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition, which is GAIN. So it's a Swiss-based foundation. And we were talking a little bit about waste versus loss and that concept, and also about the thing that gets lost in some of this discussion, which is nutrition. It's not just pounds of waste, but actually nutrition. So talk to me a little bit about that, like calories versus nutrition, and how we need to insert that a little bit into the discussion, and also a little bit about scaling this and working. You work a lot with many stakeholders, that word stakeholders, like empowering, but you empower stakeholders possibly. But yeah, talk a little bit about that, particularly that issue around nutrition and versus waste.
Happy to. I have to say I haven't heard much about nutrition here, and your most nutritious foods are your most perishable foods. And so if there's two sort of lenses I would love to put on this, would be one, loss and waste look different around the world, right? And in a lot of the countries where the low income and highly undernourished populations live, you have a situation where there isn't much waste, right? And as a matter of fact, we did a study in New Delhi last summer, and in the retail markets, there's not a lot of waste. People can't afford to waste. But, or getting back to your issue of entrepreneurs, there are entrepreneurs who are gleaning in those markets. And there's a whole secondary market for waste. So I think that you have to put a completely different lens when you're working with some of these populations who are low income and undernourished, and where they're sourcing their foods. We know that 50% of fruits and vegetables, now we all can say, where's that number coming from? But, let's just, give or take a couple, billion tons, happens between the farm gate and retail. Between the farm gate and retail. And so at the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition, for us, it's not just loss and or waste of nutritious foods, but it's which foods, providing which nutrients, yeah? So we work pretty closely with governments, with and the business community, who actually are the ones touching between the farm gate and the consumer, and trying to say, what does your cold chain look like? Do you even have a cold chain? What does packaging and crating look like? Is there even packaging and crating of these products? We work, thankfully, with the YieldWise program as their nutrition partner. And our job in that is to really take those nutrients that are lost and waste and convert them to nutrients. And in the case of Nigeria, the target commodity are tomatoes. 42% of the children in northern Nigeria are vitamin A deficient. And for those nutritionists in the room, and I see several of you here, vitamin A is critical for immune system function, for eye health, and tomatoes are a pretty good source of that. So when we see loss and waste of these foods, it's loss and waste of nutrients. And when you have populations where 42% of your children are vitamin A deficient, you can't afford to be losing tomatoes. So we work very closely with converting any loss and waste numbers as an institution into nutrients to really see the impact that loss and waste can have on nutrition.
You use to sell to businesses? You say you've kind of got an obligation to...
No, businesses don't care.
They don't care about starving children and vitamin
No,
A
I mean they
deficiency.
do from certainly in any individual cares in a business. And they also care because of a social responsibility. Many companies do have corporate social responsibility.
Right.
But from their perspective, if we work with a warehousing company that's a refrigerated warehousing company, they don't care what you put in it, right? You don't have a warehouse just for tomato. You have a warehouse where you can partition, put different cooling systems in. So it can be tomatoes, it can be mangoes, it can be leafy greens.
So they don't care.
So they're saying, we'll help you get a warehouse here.
Yeah.
And so with the GAIN, we work to partner US industry, European industry, with local warehousing companies and cold chain manufacturers in Kenya and Nigeria. In the YieldWise program, we work with fish, the fish supply chains in Indonesia. 75,000 metric tons of local fish, tongkol, they're little tunas, are lost a year in Indonesia. That's something like 13,000 metric tons of protein.
What are you doing to save the tunas there?
So we're working with local technologies and innovation. We're doing calls for innovations among local innovators. And a lot of it's very interesting. It focuses in on ice and how one would use ice from the boat all the way down through the consumer for local markets.
So it's just making the ice available actually solves a lot of the problem?
I mean, you might not know this, but chipped ice, shaved ice, it all has an impact on fish, the shelf life of fish.
Really, just the style of ice?
The type of ice, yeah.
Interesting.
And so there are technologies that can be sort of handheld.
What about
and
those
light.
big fat hipster ice cubes? Do
No,
those-
bad for fish.
Okay.
The round
Bad for
ones,
fish,
the like
yeah.
really round ones.
Yeah.
No, those
no,
don't
not
work.
good
No,
for fish.
no,
But
not good.
chipped, it needs to be
They
chipped.
want the finest, fluffiest ice.
Really?
Yeah, because it doesn't damage the fish.
Ah, there you go.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And just really quick, and keep thinking about your questions. They're going to have cocktail recipes as well later. So, but think about your questions. But I had one thing. You're using fortified staples as a way to improve nutrition. I had read a little bit about, which I thought was.
That's my other life, but I'm happy to talk about it.
Okay, all right. Google's an amazing thing. It was like fortified soy sauce. What?
So GAIN does work on fortification. I mean, it is one of the interventions in nutrition that the nutrition community can say it works. I mean, we all probably have iodized salt. If not,
Right,
it's
so
probably
that's what we're talking about.
It's probably one of the big successes when it comes to fortification. Many of us drink fortified milk. It's been around for quite some time. Fortified wheat flours. So GAIN had worked very closely to try to get that intervention as far as we could. And when you're working with that last mile of distribution, you're working with the private sector and government. So working with government and private sector, we've been able to fortify the baladi breads, which is the public distribution bread in Egypt, the fish soy sauce, etc. That's the fortification program. With loss and waste, we're focusing on dietary diversity, recognizing that people don't eat nutrients and they don't eat a commodity, but diets are what we need to improve. And so with the loss and waste issue, we are looking at commodities as part of diets.
Okay. And I just want to take one little side trip to let you talk for a minute. We were having a little discussion backstage about nutrition on college campuses, and this is an issue that you were, I was very moved by you talking about, so I just want to give you a second to talk about nutrition on college campuses, and then we'll go to questions.
Absolutely. I think many of you probably already know that we have, we work all over the world to solve the hunger problem, but I think for me it was very disheartening to find out that on an average, we have 25% of our college kids go to class hungry. That's a very serious problem. In inner city colleges, that rate could be as high as 40 to 50%. So, when I heard that first time, I didn't believe it. And I literally cried because I teach a large class. And that means, if 25% of those kids come to my class, how can I ask them to go and do homework? Because as you know, the cost of education is rising. So the first priority for students is to pay the tuition. And they need a roof. They need to buy books. Silently, they sacrifice on food. That's a huge problem. I came to America thinking that everybody has everything here. So, and then when I learned it, that's very totally unacceptable thing. So that's why several years ago, about 3-4 years ago, many of the universities and the industries, including US and other countries, they formed this organization called PUSH. Many of you probably know PUSH. And in fact, one of the volunteers, Christine, she knows, she participated that before. She's from Bloomington, Normal, Illinois, so we already established the relationship here. So the PUSH, Presidents United to Solve Hunger, they are trying to look at the campus hunger problem, the local hunger problem, and the global hunger problem out there. The students are, many of the innovations that you talk about, we can apply that here. A couple of students from my college, very recently, they have invented a new app. So they go to the grocery store and tell the manager, if, just run through when you scan your food items and see if your cans or whatever is near the end of its shelf life, you just hit the button, it'll immediately go to the local food pantry on their dashboard, and they will come and get that without, it doesn't cost you anything, so they can give it. And there are many other similar things are going on and people are working on. Campus kitchen probably is one of the kitchen project that the gentleman, the cowboy guy came and told a little earlier about that.
Point of fact, he's not a real cowboy. I, in fact, can tell you that. But anyway,
So, University of Illinois is hosting the PUSH conference in 2018, March 15 through 17. So, we would like to raise awareness on the college campuses. And, with the tuition hike and everything hike, what can we do? Because this is a major problem. The result of hunger is causing, mental illness, depressions, and many similar other issues in the college campuses. Right. So we can't just let it happen.
Right. Thank you very much. Questions? Anybody? Black flies? Yes, please. And if you stand up and maybe, or do you have a microphone, or look at us? We live in the future.
Hi,
okay.
Renee Robbins with the Abdul Latif Jameel World Water and Food Security Lab at MIT, known as JWAFS.
JWAFS, I knew you had an acronym. I was going to ask. JWAFS.
So great panel and great day. Thank you all. We've heard a few different examples about technologies to improve food preservation, the fenugreek on this panel, and the food produce coating one we heard before, and of course there's improved refrigeration and all that. In nature, there are two things going on with produce. There's spoilage, and then there's also deterioration of its nutrient content. Both happen over time, but I think naturally you get spoilage much faster than you get the deterioration of the nutrient content. We heard a little bit from some of the panelists now about concern for nutrition, not just calories. So can any of you address what the trade-off might be between trying to reduce food waste through better preservation, but the possibility over the course of that process of losing nutrients, things like antioxidants or other vitamins or whatnot?
So we're saving all the food, but it's not very good quality after we
yes,
save it.
And I think that this much is known at least about apples that have had very long storage capability before new technologies, just through refrigeration and control of ethylene gas, that apples can be stored for like a year. But they dramatically lose their antioxidant properties. So the apple that you're eating from a supermarket a year after it was picked from a tree is much less nutritious than one that you just go to pick your own in the fall in New England.
Who wants to tackle that?
I didn't mean to stump you all.
Right. I can start. I mean,
I'm interested in what you have to say too, because you're okay. I saw
so
you.
No,
I
would just second that. Long-term storage is something we have to keep an eye on, and not and really track what those can continue to add in terms of nutrient. And without getting technical, we know the difference between minerals versus vitamins. Vitamin A is particularly persnickety. And so we even look at drying. Anytime we'll be introducing a technology for preservation, we do retention studies, because we don't want to be going out there saying this apple's better because it's been stored and it's still crisp. So with drying technologies, for example, for mangoes, for drying for fish and protein, we'll be looking into doing retention studies on those nutrients as they go through the process to see when they're optimal for the diet.
Okay. Did you want to take a stab at that? Anybody else? Oh, Miss Fresh Produce person over there. Okay.
Well, I think, that was something that I really was very concerned about, because that was actually one of the barriers that I considered. And I thought, well, what could be the point of preserving food? Because what I would hear from people, even like my grandmother, is if food is very, very old, it's actually not as good for you. So that's, I think, pretty well known even in cultures where they don't have access to apples that are 100 years old. But I think what is really important to realize is a lot of the technologies that are being developed right now are actually focused on being able to retain nutrient content. And so as you mentioned, there's a lot of ways actually now that we can test for that. So I know we've done that with our product. And so I think you're always balancing between the methods that you're using to preserve, because obviously even some of the waxes and coatings and other things have other downsides, and they're extending produce, but then you're ingesting potentially harmful chemicals. as well as not having anything at all. And I think really the goal for innovators and for us has been to think about technologies that can do both, that can help us extend shelf life. Maybe we're not extending 6 months or a year, and that's what I always tell people about technologies that are natural, like FreshPaper. Don't expect your produce to resurrect, don't expect things to last 6 months or 8 months. But sometimes what we overlook is that a 1, 2, 3 day extension can actually be life-changing. And in many of the communities that we discuss, what I was shocked to learn is 12 hours makes a huge difference, because 12 hours means you can travel to that market and actually move through your produce. And so I think, what I would tell the innovators in this room is I think that's a really important point to bring up, but think about, how can technologies actually cover all of that and not just be limited in being able to do one thing, but not necessarily cover the other issues we consider.
For sure, you want to
Yeah,
jump in that quickly?
I like your question because, in fact, when we do drying experiments for rice and corn and all those, we did that. You can dry a wet corn or wet rice in a short amount of time. So what our experiments show that you produce smoked rice. You add flavor to that. People don't need that. We are also looking at the nutrient contents of that. So I think people are looking at those issues and what should be when you store it or when you dry it, how long it needs to be dried, or not the fastest drying and things like that. So more guidelines are going to come out soon.
Can I just add one more thing?
Yes, and then we'll get there. And do we have another question? Okay, we'll go there and there.
Okay, no, it links to a lot of Prasanta's work. We work also with farmer groups for on-farm storage of fruits and vegetables. And we have to remember what that does to the income of the farmer, because the market, they can get a much higher price if their mangoes can go to market 2 weeks later.
Right.
Absolutely.
And so the impact on the income of the farmer is something that's quite powerful when you bring the technologies down that far.
Great, thank you. Okay, so there's a woman there and then a gentleman with the glass thing going on up here. Okay, go ahead.
Hi. I was wondering, at the New York City Food Waste Fair, they had a few chefs who were using all sorts of leftovers. They were talking about one restaurant where they use the broccoli stems and they make like a broccoli dog out of it, as an alternative to a hot dog. And so they showed us how to use a lot of things that we normally would compost. And one of the things they showed us how to do was lactofermenting, which I've done before, but I never really thought about lactofermenting basically anything, any kitchen scrap. And so I was wondering in terms of, and apparently that's supposed to make the nutrients more bioavailable, so is this in fact a way to upcycle, and can we just basically lactoferment everything that's just about to go off?
Right, well, it sounds like that's what your farmers are learning to do,
I mean,
right?
they're trying. I'll let you know what they come up with.
Okay.
They're trying to ferment everything and anything.
Anybody want to come out firmly in favor of lactofermenting? Controversial position?
2 hands up.
Okay, all
Yeah.
right. So lactofermenting obviously is,
Well,
okay,
you
we're
can
for
command apparently pretty high prices for lacto-fermented anything. So
it. In Brooklyn, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Anyway, with the glasses here.
Thank you so much for talking about how amazing the black soldier fly larva is. It's still a very outside of the box idea for Western farmers. As someone who's traveled in other cultures where there aren't those inhibitions, do you see some barriers here that can be addressed to put this tool, this resource, into the hands of farmers, whether it's perception, regulatory, infrastructure investment?
Absolutely. There's incredible barriers here. For one, I think a large barrier is that we think that industry is solving the problem, right? Not the ones growing the food. So I think there's a lot of distrust to any kind of alternative techniques that coming up, especially when they come up from outside of this country. Regulatory. I mean, human waste is so taboo, right? When our urine is already sanitized. You can't get disease from it. It's our feces, but there's ways to process that. And if you pass it through animals and things, it becomes a big problem. And I think the regulatory measurements here in this country are definitely preventative, and they're definitely in favor of a controlled, sterilized, disinfected agricultural system. Why disinfect when you can co-infect? Right?
Wait, somebody said that to me on a date once. I was like, I don't think so. I'm like, I'm not falling for that. Anyway, it's late. I'm sorry. Do we have another question over here? No? Anyone else? Oh yeah, back here. And was there someone there back here? Thanks.
Hi, my name's Kirsty Hessing, and I'm actually the student from Bloomington Normal. So I work closely with the Food Recovery Network and Student Alumni and Advisory Board. And so one of the problems that we've faced when looking into college food insecurity issues with students is stigma. And so getting the students that really need the food to come and kind of ask for help and take the food that we have and want to give them. And so I was wondering if you had any advice on language or ways to overcome that kind of stigma.
Thank you very much again for asking that question. We are right now, not much research has been conducted in that area, but people are working on it. UC Berkeley people are working. You see our University of Illinois faculty, they are working on, we have some preliminary data, and so why don't they come out? One of the dilemma that these hungry students, they feel that, it's their fault that they're hungry. So even though we have food pantries and other things, they think, only those are for homeless people. Those are people that level with, kind of hunger in the society. So for them to come and grab that food is kind of, they will do an injustice to the other people out there. That's one of the biggest things that we are finding. They don't want to come. They don't want to be labeled as hungry people. They don't want to identify themselves as someone that cannot afford to have food. So we are trying to, just educate people. Campuses are putting at, the food at the locations. Nobody's going to monitor you. Just come and get the food out there. I think you and I talked about the campus kitchens. They are trying to generate similar type of programs in all the campuses out there. But we will learn more as more campuses bring those issues out there. More data need to be collected from the students' perception and all those kind of things.
I would imagine the waste at the food at university campuses is huge as well.
It's huge. Yeah. It's we've done another study. I shared that with Christy on one of the data from 6 months. Very recent data show that average on a student from Monday through Friday, from one student wastes 1 pound of ready cooked food. That's a huge amount of food out there.
It's amazing.
So we are, I told my students, and they think I'm crazy. I said, whenever you go to the dining hall and then you show the students are throwing food out, from your plate into the waste basket, just show that the dollar bills are flying out and getting into that thing. Some of those kind of, innovative ways of alerting people out there.
Yeah,
I think,
some of it's just awareness.
Yeah,
sure.
exactly.
Right. I'm so sorry. I know you have a question over there, but we are out of time. So let's thank our panel. You guys were fantastic.
Stay for a photo. Stand up. Thank you. Thank you so much. Amazing. You were great. Thank you so much. What a pleasure. Thank you. Thank you so much. You were amazing. Thanks. You look great on stage. Thank you. Thanks, Loren. Thank you so much. You were amazing. Really appreciate it. So I want to take this opportunity to thank Devon.